Well, good morning. It's good to be with all of you. Thank you for being here. I hope you are doing well this morning. To all of our guests, we just want you to know how humbled we are that you are with us and how encouraged we are that you are with us. We know that you could be anywhere, and yet you're giving some of your time that is this day to us, and we are just very, very grateful that you're here doing that and giving us that. And we hope that your time with us will be encouraging and will be uplifting and that it'll be beneficial to you. So we've been in this series, and this is the last lesson in it, at least for this year, that we've entitled In the Meantime. And that's with the majority of us, I kind of put it as a bookend, if you will, kind of sandwiched in. We are between three major holidays. We have Thanksgiving just a few weeks ago. Everybody enjoyed it, loved it, and then we had to pick back up. We had to go back to work and go back to school, which was difficult because we're making plans and preparations for Christmas and for the new year. And for many of us as adults, it's just going by way, way too fast as we're in the middle of the month and almost at the end of the year and still probably trying to get everything together and our ducks in a row. And if you were to ask our kids, everything is moving as slow as it possibly can be. We can't open the presents fast enough, can't get out of school fast enough. And do we have to go to school? Do we have to do all this other stuff? We're living in a meantime. What do as we're waiting? As we finished one and as we're waiting for another. We use this to describe what we as Christians are doing now. So many are looking back and honoring and remembering the birth of Jesus. But we know that Jesus grew up. We know that He lived, and He lived perfectly. We know that He died. He was on the cross for the sacrifice for our sin. And not just our sin, but the sin for the whole world. We know that He was buried in a borrowed tomb. And we know that 3 days later He came back to life to never die again and ascended and to the right hand of the Father, and He's been there ever since. And we've been waiting because the last and final message of His before He left is that I'm coming back. I'm coming back to claim my own. And when He does that, everything stops. There will be no more time and there will be no more history to be made. There will be no more decisions or choices that are in front of us. Eternity, as far as we're concerned, will be ushered in. We'll meet the Lord, we'll encounter judgment, and then our place in eternity will be determined and decided based on the decisions that we've made here on this earth and the life that we've been living. So the question we asked is, if that's what we're waiting for, and it is, then what are you and I to be doing in the meantime? If He's come and we're waiting for Him to come again, what are we to be doing in the meantime? 2 weeks ago on a Sunday night, we opened it up by discussing the fact that we should be living and knowing that the first coming of Jesus was the revelation of the grace of God. He didn't have to come. He didn't have to live. He didn't have to die. He didn't have to be resurrected. But He also didn't have to save us. But because He loves us and because He wants us to be saved, He sent His Son, born of a woman, in the fullness of time. Last week, we talked about that our meantime should be described and should be revealed in who we're working for. That we should be using this time in preparation for eternity. That as hard as it is to imagine, even as final as death seems, there is life after death. We will spend somewhere in eternity, and we need to use the time that we have today in a very wise way to prepare. But not only to prepare, but to use our talent and our gift to further the kingdom. That everybody, we can't do everything that is under the sun and that is needed to be done. We can't help everybody, but we can help somebody. And we can all do something. And that's the parable of the talents and the parable of the sheep and the goats. And we discussed that last week. And now, I want to look at a passage that actually gave birth to this series when I was working through the Thessalonian letter earlier this year, just in my own reading. Now, the Thessalonian letter was written to the church that was established by Paul in a second missionary journey. And it was a church that he spent the least amount of time with. He only got to spend about 2 or 3 weeks with the church. And then he was run out of town because of persecution and because of conflict. But it is a letter that is being written to a church to correct a couple of misconceptions and some other things. But one of the unique features of the letter is that every chapter of the first letter mentions the second coming of Jesus. It's coming back. The persecution, the conflict, all of it's going to end. And Paul is going to answer what we should be doing in the meantime by directing our minds to how we should be living in the meantime. As simple as it may be with the question I'm about to ask, it is still one of the most paramount questions that we need to seek to answer today and for the rest of this week and whatever time we have left. And it's simply this. Does God care how you live every day? If you are a follower of Jesus Christ, does He care what kind of life you live? Does it matter to Him who you are each and every day, whether you go to school, whether you go to work, even in the confines of your own home or just among each other? Does He care about who we are? And the answer is absolutely He cares. I liked what some person said in a quote. I've used it before, and I was just reminded of it earlier this week, that a man does not gain his strength by what he eats, but by what he digests. And that a man learns, not by what he reads, but by what he remembers. And a man becomes rich, not by what he earns, by what he saves. And a Christian is not a Christian by what is preached, but by what is practiced. Today, Paul is going, by inspiration of the Spirit, going to remind us what kind of life we should live if we are followers of Jesus and what that life should look like. Matter of fact, he's actually going to begin in verse 11, at the first part of verse 11 and then the last part. He's going to couch, or he's going to put everything, kind of create a little sandwich, and he's going to say, I want this life. I want you to know that in the very beginning of your journey of faith, after your response to the gospel, so you heard the good news, and in faith you repented of sin, you confessed His name, and you were immersed in water to have your sin washed away, and you come out of the water, and you're beginning this new life. We instructed you on how to live for God now. Prior to the good news, prior to the gospel, everyone here, and anyone else, we all lived a self-centered life. It was about us. It was about our needs. It was about our passions. It was about our desires. That was the focal point. It was me, me, and me. But when we died in the water, and the old man was buried along, and it was crucified with its passions and its desires, and we were raised in newness of life, we now have a better example. And we were instructed according to that example. We were commanded. But something I never noticed before as I put this and just kind of split it for you is that at some point, and Brian mentioned this in his sermon a couple of weeks ago, at some point we got to mature. We shouldn't just live a certain way just simply because the Bible tells us that. When we're young, we need commands. We need guardrails. We need boundaries. We need something of a framework so that we don't go and just ruin what God has given in terms of choices and decisions in this life. But as we grow and as we mature, we should learn to see the wisdom behind what God tells us. We should learn to see the wisdom behind the commands. So Paul will say, not only did we instruct you in terms of a certain kind of life, we actually want you, in terms of your growth and maturity, to aspire to a certain kind of life. If you have a more contemporary version, like the New Living Translation, he will say, make it your goal to live this way. The idea of the goal isn't just simply to accomplish something, but that you accomplish something and others recognize and honor you for the accomplishment. It's the teenager that graduates from high school, or the young adult that graduates from college, or the young adult that graduates from trade school, or whatever he or she has decided to pursue. It's their certificate you gained at work because you were able to accomplish something and you're being recognized and you're being honored for your commitment and your faithfulness and and other things that are associated with it. Paul would say that you need to aspire, that every Christian, if you wear the name of Christ, you should have a goal at the beginning of each day, a goal to live a certain way. A goal to live a certain way. And I wonder what our day would look like, how much transformation would happen if we actually went beyond the goal of making money, earning accolades, or trying to just have comfort or security, but that we went to something deeper and we went to something greater, that there's more to today than just simply me benefiting from something, that there's something higher and deeper and more spiritual. That's what Paul says in terms of aspiration and goal. So what does he say? What's the wisdom about around or behind aspiring to living a certain way? Well, because the Christian life is about two individuals that's not me. God and my neighbor. And Paul is going to focus on the second one. That you behave properly. Those of you that are reading the King James Version, that you live honestly toward outsiders. Simply put, we're going to spend more time with people who are not Christians than people who are. We are. And there are a lot of things that all of us here in this room, we can afford to be indifferent to. We can be indifferent towards who won the Heisman Trophy last night. We can be indifferent towards sports. Some of us just, it's a sport, don't really care. We can be indifferent in a couple of minutes towards lunch. Somebody asks, hey, what would you like for lunch? As long as we eat, I'm fine with whatever it may be. That's because it has very little to no impact on our life. Now, we can't be indifferent towards our money. You can't be indifferent towards your job. We cannot, as God's people, be indifferent towards those who are not Christians. And we cannot be indifferent towards the impact and the influence we can have on them. And ultimately, the greatest defense for the Christian faith isn't a cleverly assigned group of arguments. It isn't a group of passages that we can put that make coherent sense. The greatest defense for the Christian faith is and has always been the Christian. And for a lot of people, the make or break of the Christian faith is how the Christian is or isn't living. We cannot be indifferent towards how we live. We cannot throw our hands up and say, it may matter, it may not, because it's going to have a lot of impact. How you live and how I live as Christians each and every day matters. And one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight the King James Version is the honesty of how it translates that original word. We need to live an honest life. And the wisdom behind that phrase, behaving properly, and that includes morality, and that includes ethics. And by the way, as a side note, it is a shame if there are those who are not of Christ who live a better moral and ethical life than those who are. We need to behave properly. We need to conduct ourselves properly. But we need to do so with honesty. Kind of the idea behind it is authenticity. So my job is words. And I like this time of year because the dictionaries come out with a word of the year. They like to come out with one to describe the last calendar year. And I'm just always fascinated with how it works. And dictionary.com has theirs, and Oxford Dictionary has theirs. And Anne-Marie and I were actually talking earlier this week, and she shared it with me because she knows I like things like that. Kind of moves the needle. I like to think about it. She shared with me the word of the year for Merriam-Webster, Webster's Dictionary. You want to know what the word of the year according to Webster's Dictionary is for 2023? Authentic. Now, got to put a little asterisk because that is going to be used from a worldly standpoint. Sadly, it would be live your authentic self, right? But just because something is hijacked and used for worldly and ungodly means doesn't mean that a Christian can't look behind it and realize that God does care about how authentic we are. That God actually cares that we live in a very honest way. That we don't show up in a church building and that we don't speak and act in one way, and then that we show up at a workplace or a school and we speak and act in a different way. God cares about how authentic you and I are. Not because we're authentic for ourselves, but because there are people who need to know Jesus. And you and I, because we are the church, not this building, but you and I are the church, well, you may be the only window in which somebody comes to know Jesus. And heaven forbid that hypocrisy is what stands in the way of somebody knowing Jesus. We want you to make it your goal, says Paul, to live honestly before the outsiders that you rub shoulders and elbows with. Because God cares about how you live. Whether you are the youngest among us or the oldest, God cares about how you live. So let's look at three aspects from this context of what kind of life we're to live. First, Paul says that we ought to live a quiet life. The Thessalonian church was sadly born out of conflict and persecution. No fault of their own, just those who decided to make enemies of the gospel and of Jesus and the sharing of the good news. And you can go back in the book of Acts and you can read all the things that surrounded that. There is no avoiding of conflict, and we'll talk about it tonight because I want to go ahead and say that living a quiet life doesn't mean that we avoid or run away from conflict. You ought to be able to stand on the truth. You need to know the truth and stand on the truth and stand for the truth. And sometimes conflict is going to happen, and that's okay. Conflict isn't because you and I are the source of the conflict. And that's what Paul is communicating when he says a quiet life. The Christian is not the source of conflict. The Christian is not the source of drama. The Christian is not the source of upheaval. The Christian is not the source of rebellion. The Christian is not the source of anything that breeds just chaos and anything else. No, the Christian, whether he or she is living in Rome or they're living in the 21st century in this country, they are of a benefit to whatever environment and whatever location they are found in. They are an individual who promotes peace. They are an individual who understands that as far as it depends on me, I'm going to live at peace with all men. They are the individual that has decided, based on the truth of God's Word, that when evil comes my way, I am not going to repay evil for evil, but I will repay evil with good. That the Christian has committed themselves to the way of Jesus and to the life of Jesus. Not running away from the conflict, but I'm not going to add fuel to the fire. So a few years after Paul writes this Thessalonian letter, he'll write a personal letter to a young man by the name of Timothy, who's been left at a church in Ephesus, and he's kind of the located preacher, and he's got a lot of things to contend with. But he says this to Timothy that describes the quiet life. He says, lead a peaceful life. Lead a peaceful and quiet life. But notice how he describes it. And this is what we are to aspire. This is our goal. This is who we are to be. Wherever we find ourselves, godly and dignified in every way. You want to know what a quiet life looks like? It's a life that puts a high premium on godliness. Everybody else is going to have the freedom to choose how they will live their life. That is one of the gifts that God gives to all humanity. But we have chosen to use that gift to bring ourselves under the lordship of Jesus. There are certain expectations to how we are to live. Wherever we are, wherever we go, whomever we are around, they need to know from the type of life we live that God is the source of the life. We live for Him. We live because of Him. And the way we live with our morality, with our ethics, and everything else isn't because we determined what was right or wrong. It isn't because we determined what was healthy or unhealthy. It isn't even because we determined what was godly or ungodly. He determined that. And we committed ourselves to live that way. We have committed ourselves, wherever we are, whatever we're going to do, it's going to be a godly life, and it's going to be a life of dignity. It's amazing. In the time of Jeremiah, I don't know, things just got so bad in the time of Israel that Jeremiah the prophet would just exclaim that the people have forgotten how to blush. They just forgot what it meant to be embarrassed by how you live. It's amazing that we seem to be replaying some of that, isn't it? People don't know how to be embarrassed by how they're talking or how they're acting, how they treat their parents or how they treat their family, or how they just treat another human being. We've seen that. Just walk a store for an hour or less, and you can hear it, and you can see it. Christians are not that way. That's part of what dignity isn't just that we live in a dignified way in terms, again, of morality and ethics, but it comes out in how we treat even the outsiders. Well, they didn't treat me in a dignified way. Well, we're not expecting them to because they're not Christians. We cannot expect people who are not Christians to behave like Christians. But the expectation exists for those who are Christians to respond in a Christian way. Treat them with dignity, whomever it may be. And what's the wisdom behind a quiet life? Well, because there's something truer and more pure. And that is because we have aligned our heart and our mind with God's desire. We cannot ever forget that at the beginning and the end of every day, there is one desire God has above them all. That all people will be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. You and I are the vehicle for this. We are the means. We are God's hands and feet to accomplish His desire and His will. Please, don't let an ungodly, undignified, unquiet, loud, chaotic life get in the way of what God desires for your friend and for your coworker, your family member, and your neighbor. He goes on to say that we need to mind our own business. Some of you have a version that says, mind your own affairs. And I wrote in the margin of my Bible that this was a lot more difficult for us because there are people who just use social media to put their business out there for everybody. And it's kind of hard. You know, sometimes it's like, why are you saying what you're saying and doing what you're doing? But then we don't think. But I digress. That's a soapbox. Minding your own business. Now, part of this, that what happened in the Thessalonian letter is that they were so firmly convicted that Jesus was coming back in their lifetime that they quit everything. They quit their job. They quit everything. They just sat on their hands and feet all day long. They had good intentions. Hey, Jesus is coming back. We're listening to you. We're going to quit our job. We're going to quit everything, and we're just going to sit here. But everybody knows what happens when we have so much time on our hands, don't we? We know what happens. Voids always get filled. And one of the things that were happening is that some of you that have an older translation, a lot of people became busybodies. A lot of people became nosy. They're just in other people's business. It's one thing for us to be involved in each other's life so that we can help each other get to heaven. And it's another thing for us to be involved in each other's life because we're addicted to drama. And you know people who are addicted to that. It's not good. It's not healthy. It doesn't benefit anybody. If we're involved in each other's life so that we can help each other get to heaven and we can live a godly and dignified life, that's great. That's what we're supposed to do. That's what Christianity is about. A one another that sees you and sees me and says, let's go to heaven together. Not let's sit around and talk. which is the wisdom behind all of this. It's how we're using our words in the meantime. It's what we're going to use this for. You know the statistics. You've at least come across them. That at any given day, at the end of any given day, we have spoken somewhere between 6 to 8, perhaps 10,000 words in that day. That's a lot of words. But everything out of here, especially the older we get to determine through here and here. You get to decide, and I do too, what this is going to be used for. And it can be used for anything. It can be used for anything. I can cut people down. I can offend them. I can destroy them. I can start a war. Or I could do it God's way and use it for what He wants it for. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, says the Apostle Paul to the Ephesian church, but only such that is good for building up, as fits the occasion. I really like this last phrase, that it may give grace to those who hear. There are a lot of ungracious things we've heard this week. It may not have been from our own mouth or somebody towards us, just sadly somebody who used their words to absolutely eviscerate somebody else. There are people who use their words this week for lying and for gossiping and for slander. There are people who use their words this week to cut down and to destroy and to hurt and to maim. But the Christian is so dedicated to the way that God wants them to live, because they want to live in an honest way before the outsiders, that everything that comes out of my mouth, to the best of my ability, I want it to be a gracious thing. And by the way, a lot of us think, well, that means I can't tell the truth. You can tell the truth in love and grace. You can always tell the truth, and you should tell the truth. Saying something hard doesn't mean it's ungracious or unloving. Sometimes it needs to be said. But you can say it with a measurement of salt. What does it look like for us to commit and have a life where we're minding our own affairs in the sense that we're not using this to talk down or to hurt somebody else? And then last of all, to work with your own hands. Again, we have to understand this statement where Paul is addressing a group of Christians who quit their job. Again, good intentions, but they quit their job. In other words, he's just telling them, I understand what you did, but you need to go back to work. You need to go back to work. The wisdom behind all of this is the value of work. For whatever reason, we're allergic to work. And we can't be allergic to work. And the reason we can't is because work appears in the Garden of Eden. It does not appear after the fall. It appears before the fall. Adam is put into the garden to work it and to tend it. And the wisdom behind all of this is that work gives meaning. And the work gives purpose. That you got a reason to get up and to do something. But there's also another layer of wisdom to this too. It's who you are when you're working. So it's about two things: integrity and character. It's about integrity and it's about character. And those qualities start when we're young. So we're committed to a life that isn't going to cheat. I'm not going to cheat myself by taking the easy way. I'm not going to cheat my teachers. I'm not going to cheat my classmates. I'm not going to cheat my employer. I'm not going to cheat my employees. I'm going to be an individual who is committed to the way of character and integrity. I'm going to work with my own hands and not expect somebody to do it for me. If I need help, I'll ask for help. But I'm not entitled to anything, and neither are you. No one's entitled to a good grade. No one's entitled to a good paycheck. No one's entitled to a raise. No one's entitled to a big house or a nice car or fancy clothes. No one's entitled to anything. We work with our own hands, but we work with honesty and we work with integrity. We don't find ways to cheat the system, even if it's unfair. We're going to work within that framework, and we're going to bring dignity and godliness to this. We're going to transform it from the inside out. And at the end of the day, no matter who it is, whether it's my teacher, whether it's somebody I'm working on a project with, it's a coworker, at the end of the day, they're going to know that I'm reliable. And one of the things that is happening is that unreliability is on a rise. Christians are always reliable. We are reliable to fulfill our job and to meet our obligations and to do it in an honest way, full of integrity. That we are going to live this way because we know at the end of the day, I don't want somebody to point a finger and say, well, I thought you were a Christian, and I thought Christians did such and such. And you know that because you've heard it before. That's not who we are. We are the people. Are we going to live perfectly? No. We know that. But that does not mean that we can live unintentionally either. I like the proverb that says in Proverbs 10:9, and this comes from the New Living Translation, people with integrity walk safely, but those who follow crooked paths will be exposed. You want a secure way of living? Put a high value and a high premium. I don't know what others will do, but we need to make our own minds up. We need to put a high value and a high premium on integrity and on character. You know what? If my boss wants me to show up tomorrow at 8 o'clock, we'll be there at 7:45, and I'll be ready. And I'm going to give him a good job or her a good job. I'm not going to find a way to do less because I just simply don't want to be there. I'm going to have a good attitude, and I'm going to do what's right. It's amazing to me that what God says at the end of all of this is that really the way to make a difference and an impact with the outsiders doesn't require us to literally move heaven and earth. Just embrace His way of living. Embrace His way of thinking and embrace His way of living. I wonder what our day would look like and in all the environments that we find ourselves in if we commit, knowing the outsiders that are around us, if we commit a quiet life, minding our own business, and working with our own hands. That sounds like a very good life to me. It sounds like one that our society needs. Let's go out and live that way in the meantime. If you're not a Christian, let me encourage you to obey the gospel. There is, yes, a way to live, and it's a way to live without Jesus. But the way to live with Jesus is always going to be the better life. It's the best life. Because He models all the things that we've discussed here. But He's also the one who gives us life. We cannot find life in ourselves. Can't find it in our jobs. We can't find it in our academics. Life can only be found in one place only, and that is with the Lord. If you need to respond to Him, in His grace and His mercy, He's ready to save you. He just simply says, if the one who believes and is baptized will be saved. We want to encourage you to do that as we stand and sing this